situation in South Korea with the current president having this dramatic moment where he said, I'm going to sign martial law at like 11 p.m. on a certain night, and thinking he's going to send some troops to bar the door from the legislature, but they beat him to it, and then they voted and legally undid the thing before really even the sun had hardly come up the next day. Now, a lot of people are just saying this is a big embarrassment to him, et cetera, but you think it's much more than that.
President Yoon is the head of the Party of People's Power. I think they call it the People's Power Party. Before that, it was the Grand National Party. It had other names, but it's effectively the party that has always aligned itself with Washington. And the people at the top of it were effectively cronies of American imperialism. In other words, they represented the interests of Washington first and foremost, and the interests of the people living on the peninsula secondly, on the assumption that those two interests were identical. You always get that, and they never are. In 1997, in Breaking the Phalanx, I wrote a section in there urging for the future that the four-star who commands forces on the Korean peninsula should be a Korean. He's always been an American four-star ever since the Korean War. And we command today all the forces, Korean and American, that are on that peninsula. We have about 27,000, 26,000 people on the peninsula. The Koreans, of course, have hundreds of thousands of troops and aircraft and so forth. We should be out of there. We're not really required to be there any longer. And the population in North Korea has dropped from 27, 28, 29 million down to 23 or 22 million through mass starvation, mass murder, whatever. That particular regime has been circling the drain economically and in human terms for years. But the rub has always been that we are there. And the assumption was that our nuclear umbrella would act as the ultimate secure network for Korea. Yoon came in a few years ago and followed a liberal nationalist government. And that government was pressing for its own independence and sovereignty to become a fully sovereign state. And the president at the time, President Moon, said, how can I show myself in public and meet with the president of China, meet with the prime minister of Japan, meet with the president of Malaysia, the leader of Vietnam? How do I do that when everybody knows I don't command Korea's armed forces? Our armed forces are under the command of Washington. We are not a truly sovereign state. And he was voted out of office by a razor-thin margin. And at the time President Moon was voted out, or his party was voted out of power, and his successor lost, there was a lot of discussion in Korea just beneath the surface about CIA meddling in the Korean election. Because the Korean intelligence services, and in fact much of its military, are appendages of U.S. intelligence and U.S. military power. And so the generals and the leaders in those bureaucracies tend to align with someone like Prime Minister Yoon. Now, Yoon concluded within the last couple of years that he and his party were finished, that his party could not win a future election because the population, the electorate in Korea is fed up with him, fed up with his behavior. One of the things that they all rebelled against was this notion of, well, there are North Koreans fighting for the Russians against Ukrainians. We should send troops to fight in Ukraine for NATO. Well, the Korean population said that's ridiculous. First of all, large numbers of them didn't believe it, that there are any North Koreans. As we know, there are no North Koreans fighting anybody in Ukraine. But the key thing is that they said, that's outrageous. We don't want it. And his position in the polls had sunk dramatically. So he said, the only way that I can keep Korea in the American orbit, firmly rooted as an American military colony, is if I stage a putsch and take over and become dictator of South Korea on the basis of erroneous emergencies, an imminent attack from the north and all this sort of business, none of which is true. It's failed because to the credit of the Korean people and their politicians, they got into the parliament and they voted unanimously to crush this. And his opposition has the majority in parliament anyway, but even much of his party voted with the opposition. So it was an overwhelming vote that said, stop this nonsense, end this business once and for all. So I think Yoon is probably going to be impeached. He may well end up in jail with some other people. I don't know what they'll do about the leaders in the intelligence and the military, but I'm sure there will be a reckoning with those people as well. The Koreans want national sovereignty. They want independence. They want to control the destiny of their people and their country. I fully support that, and I hope this works for them, because right now nobody in Washington wants this to happen.
Yeah, and in fact, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was stationed in Korea when I was a captain back in the late 1990s, and I remember then that there was talk that we're working things out so that very soon we're going to shift, as you suggested, to a Korean head of the Combined Forces Command, the CFC it was called at the time. And it's like every year they say, well, they're getting closer, but nothing ever happened. So why does the United States, and this may be a rhetorical question, why does the United States oppose Koreans being in charge of the Korean military?
Why did the British want to retain permanent authority in India over the British Indian Army and the British Indian Foreign Service and Diplomatic Corps and government? Why do any of these powers do what they do? I think it's an acute case of national narcissism. It's the view that we keep justifying on the basis of an unchanging strategic environment, which you and I know is changing all the time. So they're pitching, oh, no. If you leave, there will be a war immediately in Northeast Asia. No, there won't. Nobody in Asia right now, nobody, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, nobody wants a war. The Vietnamese now have a hotline that goes from Ho Chi Minh City straight up to Beijing. And they've had plenty of disputes over fishing grounds, over oil resources, control of the South China Sea. They've sorted it out. It's not perfect, but they've sorted it out, and they agreed. We don't want to go to war, so they have this hotline. We are in the Philippines for the same reason. In fact, the Philippine government has said openly, we don't want to be goaded into war with China because of the United States. We want to justify our presence in Asia in perpetuity, our military presence. Notice I didn't say economic presence.
Yeah.
Again, everybody wants to do business with us. We should want to do business with everybody. And we're caught up in this cycle of what I would call bribery, bullying, and bombing. That's the way we do business. Either you do what we like or want, and you agree to our terms of trade, or, well, we'll bribe you if that doesn't work. We'll bully you, and if that doesn't work, we'll show up and bomb you. It's got to stop. It has no future in the 21st century. We got to stop living in the early 20th century. It's the only problem I have with all these people who talk about great power competition. Look, there's competition all over the world between various regional blocks. If anything, we're seeing regional blocks emerge. That competition is inevitable. It doesn't have to be armed.
Yeah.
And that's the point that we have to get through our heads. We're still set up for a world that doesn't exist anymore. That's why we continue to treat people that live in West Africa, North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Southwest Asia, Central Asia, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, as though they're backward. No, these people aren't backward. Visit these places. Look at the infrastructure. Exactly. Look what they've created. Now, they may not all be what we think is appropriate in terms of pristine liberal democracies, but that's none of our business. What works is what we should respect, and we should respect the legitimacy of governments that have the power to maintain themselves. If the people don't like it, eventually that will change. We've seen that. The only exception, I think, is North Korea. That really is an exception to that rule. And those poor people are living permanently in a prison. I'd like to see them liberated, and I'm sure the South does as well. The only way to get there, though, is for us to get out.
Yeah.
We're in the way of that. And that helps North Korea to stay in existence. And everybody thinks China is behind it. It is not. Russia has always been North Korea's sponsor and backer, because from the time Stalin helped to create it after World War II, he saw it as a useful strategic hedge against the Japanese. as well as us. So we need to get out of there. And if they want to fight it out with the Japanese, let them go and do it. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because again, these are not irrational human beings. These people are intelligent and they don't see any point to war. And I think that's what Putin, in his own way, has been trying to say over and over and over again. Listen to him. Well, if we go to nuclear weapons, we all die. And then he adds, but we in Russia will be martyrs. We'll go to heaven because we're martyrs. Okay, Vlad, I'm with you on that. He doesn't want to go. I don't want to go that way.
Yeah.
And we need to listen. What we don't listen. It's back to we don't listen. We don't listen to anybody.
Yeah. Because I mean, you said it really good that we never escaped the end of the Cold War. It's still 1992 in our minds, and we've never had anything behaved any differently because this stuff worked in 1992. We could just do whatever we wanted, and then the world has grown up, and so much of the rest of the world that was neutral before is now turning against us just because they see this ridiculous stuff coming out of our mouth. It's not tied to reality, and in fact, it's usually contradictory to reality. And eventually, Doug, I mean, historically, that does come with a price, and at some point it gets paid whether we want it to or not.
It's always best to, as Queen Elizabeth II said in 1976, when we had our 200th anniversary, because I was there to listen to her. She said, we learned from the American Revolution, it's better to gracefully release what you cannot forcibly retain. Well,
wow.
That eventually happened. It should have happened closer to the end of World War I, but it happened after World War II. But ultimately, why? Britain was broke. It was financially ruined. And we're on that path now, I think.
Yeah. Well, time will tell on that, certainly, but all the signs are there. But anyway, but listen, really appreciate you as always, because you bring so many things to the table, so much historical analogies and so much clarity on things that are really complicated, and we really appreciate it.
Okay, good, Dan. Thanks.
And thank you guys very much, too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. And also let you know we are on podcast now. We have added that to it. Just go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get your podcast. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you'll find us waiting there for you. Thank you very much, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.